Night fell over Manhattan like a black velvet shawl, heavy and still. In the middle of the financial district, the glass tower of Summit Financial cast its glow into the sky like a torch. But inside, on the top floor, every sound had been drained away. Only darkness remained, the cold fluorescence of the lights and the whisper of the air conditioning. In that space, a woman kept creeping. Naomi Carter. 35 years old, dark-skinned, slender, with hands made rough by chemicals and the kinds of work other people would never choose. She did not wear a fine suit, only a pale blue uniform with a plastic name badge clipped loosely at her chest. People usually passed by without sparing her a glance. To them, Naomi was just a blurred face in a massive machine, the one who picked up shredded paper, wiped away coffee rings, and changed trash bags every night. Perhaps that was why the night shift manager's words landed like an invisible slap. Remember your place. Someone like you belongs with a mop. Don't go anywhere near the chairman's office. Naomi did not answer. She knew that tone too well, the voice that sounded almost gentle but carried a baked-in contempt. She bent her back, pushed the little cart reeking of disinfectant, and kept working, silent, as always. But tonight that silence was torn open. From the chairman's office, where the gleaming wooden floor and long panes of glass looked out over the city, a telephone began to ring. At first it sounded like a stray note in the dark. Then it repeated, persistent, imploring, as if it were calling Naomi herself. She stopped short. The mop slid from her hand. That ring. This was not a sound someone like her was usually allowed to hear. It belonged to another world, where billion-dollar decisions were made in a few sentences, where the fate of thousands could change with a single nod. Naomi moved slowly toward the room. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear of the phone, but because the warning still echoed in her head. Don't go anywhere near the chairman's office. And still the phone rang. Rang like a challenge. Rang as if to say, there will come a time when the one deemed lowest must answer for what is highest. Naomi stood on the threshold. Her shadow fell across the wooden floor, long and slender. She whispered, almost only loud enough for herself to hear, if I pick up, everything will change. And that was the moment a story began. No longer just Naomi's alone. Naomi Carter was not born in the shadow of financial towers. She grew up in a cramped neighborhood in the South Bronx, where ambulance sirens were the familiar soundtrack, where each winter night the wind slipped through rotten wooden frames and made the apartment shiver. Her mother, Lorraine, worked the morning shift in a small hospital, a nurse's aide whose exhausting labor was rarely recognized. Her father, a black man with broad hands and a laugh that once filled the whole block, vanished when Naomi was 9. He left the way men so often did in the stories women of color told each other. No letter, no farewell, only an old pair of shoes abandoned in a closet corner. Naomi grew up between two realities. On one side, a poor neighborhood, dusty, gray, cramped. On the other hand, the dream her mother planted. You must study, Naomi. You must go farther than I did. Don't let your life gather dust like the hospital floor I scrub every day. She listened and she believed. Naomi was a strong student. Pages of economics, statistics, problems, numbers on charts, all of it opened another door, a world she had never stepped into but longed to see. When she graduated from college, the diploma shook in her hand like a certificate declaring she could. That night her mother cried, but not out of sorrow. She embraced her daughter and whispered, "You've proven we are worthy too." But real life rarely honors a diploma's promise. Naomi entered the job market convinced that ability would speak for itself. But she quickly learned, some doors never open, no matter how hard you knock. She remembered her first interview at a brokerage firm. The interviewer, a salt-and-pepper-haired man with a polite smile, looked over her resume, then glanced up. His eyes skimmed over her curls, her dark skin, the cheap shirt her mother had patched. He nodded slightly, as if the outcome were already decided. "Thank you, Miss Carter. We'll be in touch." But they never were. Another interview. This time, Naomi gathered all her courage, prepared thoroughly, and answered every question fluently. At the end, the manager smiled, but his words left her numb. "Truth is, our company is looking for someone who better fits the representative image. You understand, don't you?" Naomi understood. Behind the word image stood an invisible wall: skin color, gender, background. That evening, she walked home, her old shoes scraping the cracked sidewalk, tears falling. Not from failure, but from the feeling of invisibility. She wasn't judged by the knowledge in her head, but by the color of her skin. In the months that followed, Naomi cycled through temporary jobs: receptionist, data entry, and administrative support. Everywhere she felt the same gaze, half pity, half disdain. When she applied for a project manager role, a white colleague looked her in the eye and said, "You really think someone like you can lead us?" Naomi didn't answer. She learned to swallow her replies along with the pain. And so, year after year, she was pushed further to the margins. In the end, Naomi found only short-term contracts, low pay, no benefits. No one remembered her name. That was how she entered Summit Financial. On her first day, she stepped into the gleaming glass tower. The security guard checked her badge, raised an eyebrow, then muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "Contract support staff? They swap these out all the time. Tomorrow there'll probably be another face." The words stamped her. She wasn't seen as permanent, just a shadow, there, but not really there. Even so, Naomi kept trying. She arrived on time, left late, and did the jobs no one else wanted. Wiped coffee stains from the executives' glass desks, straightened chairs in conference rooms where billion-dollar deals were discussed, collected trash bags stuffed with crumpled documents, sometimes still reeking of late-night liquor. No one asked her name. Usually, they called out briefly, "Hey, girl." Sometimes more sharply, "You there, clean up." Naomi learned silence. But in silence, she observed. She overheard arguments in the hallways about exclusivity clauses, about multi-million-dollar margins. She remembered the trembling voice of a junior employee being shouted down, "If you mess up again, don't expect to be here next week." She saw how executives waved warmly at their white colleagues, but turned cold to employees of color. Naomi stored every detail in memory, not to use against anyone, but to remind herself, "They don't see me, but I see them." Her invisible shadow passed down the hall each night, as if she too had become part of the building: brick, glass, and silence. Sometimes, standing at the windows on the 45th floor, looking down at Manhattan blazing with light, Naomi whispered the question she had never dared to say aloud. "Will there ever be a day when someone like me sits at that table, instead of wiping the coffee off it?" Then she shook her head, chuckling at herself. Because the question felt too far away, like a dream covered in dust. Naomi kept living that way, day after day, and pouring her strength into small tasks, hiding her anger, holding onto a shred of dignity like a dying ember. But that night, the night the chairman's phone rang in the dark, all the dust of her past was suddenly stirred up, and for the first time, Naomi stood before a choice: remain silent to stay safe, or step out of the shadows to answer. Inside that towering glass building, night brought a very different kind of silence. By day, the 45th floor corridors echoed with the rhythm of heels striking, the hum of printers, and the bark of executives scolding their staff. But when the sun slipped away, it was as if life drained out of the very walls. Naomi often told herself, "At night, this place feels like the graveyard of ambition." By day, they sacrifice everything to climb higher. By night, it's just me, my broom, and my cart. She was used to that rhythm. But that night, the rhythm was broken. A phone rang, slicing through the quiet. Then again. The sound was sharp, like a needle engraving itself into space. Naomi turned her head. In the chairman's office, where the polished wood desk still glowed faintly under soft golden light, the desk phone blinked red. The number flashing on the screen stretched long with an international code. The ringing struck her chest like a hammer. She froze, still clutching a trash bag. A familiar voice suddenly rose in her head, the voice of the night manager. "Remember your place. Don't go near the chairman's office." Naomi shivered. She knew well the consequences of touching what wasn't hers. At Summit Financial, boundaries were brutally clear. Some doors opened for a chosen few and stayed shut forever for the rest. But the phone kept ringing. Ring, then pause. Ring again. Each time louder, more insistent, like a plea for help. Naomi clenched her fist. She told herself, "No, this isn't my business. I'm just a contract worker. If they find out, I'll be fired instantly." She stepped back, about to walk away. But her feet felt heavy, as if an invisible cord pulled her toward that faintly glowing room. And in that moment, memories flooded back. Interviews where she was rejected for her skin. Words laced with half pity, half contempt. The stares that slipped through her as though she were transparent. Naomi knew too well the sting of being made invisible. And now the phone rang as if to say, "If you don't pick up, you will remain invisible forever." She stood in the doorway, heart hammering. The fluorescent lights reflected against the glass, showing her shadow, small, weary, but with eyes suddenly burning bright. Naomi whispered to herself, "It's only a call, but maybe it's my only chance to prove I exist." The ringing stopped. For a moment, the room sank into stillness. Naomi exhaled, relief mixed with disappointment. She turned to leave. Then suddenly, the phone rang again. This time urgent, relentless, like a panicked heartbeat. Naomi froze. She closed her eyes, and in the darkness behind her lids, she saw her mother's face, drenched in sweat after a hospital shift, still smiling, still encouraging. "You deserve to be heard, Naomi. Don't let anyone silence you." When she opened her eyes, Naomi knew she could not turn away. Not this time. She set the trash bag down, wiped her hands against the worn hem of her blue shirt. Then she stepped into the room. Her footsteps echoed across the wooden floor, so clear that even she hardly recognized herself. Naomi stopped before the large desk where the phone still blinked. She looked at it as if it were a door. On one side, safety, walk away, stay silent, keep doing the menial tasks. On the other hand, danger, losing her job, humiliation, being thrown out of a place she never truly belonged. But on that other side was something else, the truth about herself. Naomi drew a deep breath and reached out. Her fingers trembled, as if touching something forbidden. She lifted the receiver. In that moment, all other sounds vanished. Only her quickened breath and a long silence on the line before a man's voice broke through, urgent, weighted with a European cadence. At last, someone answered. "Is this Summit Financial? This is Jean-Luc Moreau from Paris. I've been calling all night. I need to speak to Sterling immediately. If not, this deal collapses before dawn." Naomi froze. She had no idea that this small gesture, lifting a receiver, would hurl her entire life into a storm where prejudice, power, and dignity would collide, and not only her fate would shift, but the destiny of a billion-dollar corporation would tilt as well. ChatGPT Danoi. The receiver was ice-cold in Naomi's hand. She couldn't tell if she was trembling because of the air conditioning blowing down from above, or because of the words that had just dropped through the line. I've been calling all night. If not, this deal collapses before dawn. The man's voice surged with urgency and anger. It carried the cadence of Paris, rapid, pressing, as if every word were a blade slammed against a wooden desk. Naomi swallowed hard. Her throat was dry, burning. For a split second, she wanted to slam the receiver down, to pretend she hadn't heard a thing. But her ears clung to every word, as if hypnotized. She gathered all her courage and answered softly, "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling isn't here. I'm the night shift worker." An angry hiss erupted through the line. "Night staff? Is this some joke? Do you know what this contract is worth? One wrong signature and thousands lose their jobs. I need Sterling, now." Naomi went silent. Her hand gripped the receiver so tightly her knuckles turned white. She knew she had no right to step into matters like this. Billion-dollar contracts belonged to a world forever out of her reach. But then her mother's face came back to her, sun-darkened skin, weary from endless hospital shifts, yet still smiling, still urging her daughter forward. "Never let anyone silence you, Naomi." Naomi drew in a breath. "Mr. Moreau, I am not an executive. But if what you're saying is that important, I can leave a message. I'll make sure Mr. Sterling knows the moment he arrives." A bitter laugh snapped through the line. "Leave a message? Do you understand? I cannot wait. If there's no explanation by morning, we walk away. The entire project ends. Do you understand the word end?" Naomi felt her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She didn't fully understand the jargon Moreau hurled, exclusivity clause, contractual language, board approval, but one thing was clear: the deal would collapse without a response that very night. Then she remembered. Just a few nights ago, while scrubbing a hallway floor, she'd overheard two directors whispering, "Slip the exclusivity clause in. They won't notice. Tomorrow morning it'll be signed and done." She hadn't grasped it then, but now the pieces lit up like a flare in her mind. She tightened her grip on the receiver. "Sir, I did see a contract on the chairman's desk. Certain parts were marked, especially the exclusivity clause. I think that's what you're talking about." Silence blanketed the line. Naomi feared she had gone too far. Then came the sound of heavy breathing on the other end. Yes, exactly. The original never had that clause. Someone inserted it. If it remains, our board will never accept it. Never. Naomi lowered herself onto the edge of the leather chair. For the first time in 7 months at Summit, she dared touch that chair, the one meant only for the chairman. But now she had no other choice. "Mr. Moreau," she said, voice trembling yet steady, "I cannot alter the contract. I'm only a small employee, but I promise you this. Tomorrow morning, when Mr. Sterling arrives, I will make sure he knows. Please, wait until then." The line fell into a long silence. Naomi thought she had lost everything. Then Jean-Luc's voice returned, lower, rougher. "You are not an executive. You are not a lawyer. Why should I trust a night worker?" The question cut straight through Naomi's heart. She had heard it too many times before. Why trust her? Who was she? She was nobody. But this time, instead of retreating, she lifted her head. "You may not trust me," Naomi said, each word deliberate, "but trust the truth. If you hang up now, no one else will know this problem exists. If you give me until morning, at least there will be a chance to set it right." The air tightened like a pulled string. Naomi hardly breathed. Finally, at last, a heavy sigh drifted back through the line. "Very well, I'll wait, but only until dawn. If not, this contract is finished, and I will remember the name Carter." Click. The call ended. Naomi set the receiver down on the desk. Her hands shook violently, sweat drenched her body as if she'd just walked through a storm. The room sank into silence once more. But Naomi knew, after this night, her life would never be the same. She had just crossed a line she had avoided for years. Ahead of her, she didn't know if praise or dismissal awaited. But for the first time in so long, Naomi felt something strange spread through her chest. She had been heard, and she had dared to answer. The room sank into silence after the call ended. Naomi sat frozen in the leather chair, heart pounding as though the heavy voice from Paris still echoed. I will remember the name Carter. She knew she had just crossed a line. She had stepped outside the boundaries this company had imposed on her for months. Clean the floors, don't touch anything above your station. Naomi drew a long breath, stood up, and moved to set the receiver neatly back on the desk. But the office door suddenly swung open. A tall man strode in. A crisp black suit, a deep red tie and angular features, always wearing a smirk of disdain. It was Victor Lang, Vice President of Human Resources, renowned for his harshness and infamous for his biting remarks about employees of color. His eyes locked instantly on Naomi. The receiver was still in her hand. What the hell is this? Victor growled, shutting the door behind him and striding straight toward the desk. Naomi, startled, hurriedly placing the phone down. What are you doing in the chairman's office, His voice rose, sharp enough to echo across the whole floor. A contract worker, a cleaning girl, daring to touch Mr. Sterling's phone. Naomi felt the blood rush to her face. She stammered. The phone kept ringing. I thought, maybe it was important. Victor burst out with a bitter laugh. Important? You think you're smart enough to decide what's important here? Someone like you only needs to bow your head and stay silent. We pay you to mop floors, not to play director. Each word fell like shards of ice, cold, cutting, merciless. Naomi wanted to swallow it all back, as she had so many times before. But her hands still shook, because inside her still echoed Moreau's words. I will remember the name Carter. She clenched her fist, forcing her voice steady. I didn't mean to overstep, but if I hadn't answered, an entire deal might have collapsed. Victor raised his brows, eyes flashing with contempt. Listen to yourself. A black woman on a temporary contract, thinking she just saved the company. That's laughable. Naomi caught every word. This was no longer about work. This was a slap of racism and rank straight to her face. She inhaled deeply. I wasn't thinking of myself. I only wanted the company not to lose a key client. If you don't believe me, you can check the contract on the desk. The exclusivity clause has been altered. Victor's expression darkened. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her, engulfing her. What did you just say? Are you accusing us of wrongdoing? Do you know the consequences of fabricating lies like this? Believe me, Naomi Carter. Tomorrow morning you will never set foot in this building again. Her name spat from his mouth like a sentence. Naomi felt her chest tighten. She was used to being belittled, but this threat carried a different weight. It wasn't just her meager job he wanted to take. It was the dignity she had just fought to reclaim. In that moment, Naomi could have chosen silence. She could have taken the blame that wasn't hers in exchange for safety. But her eyes flicked almost instinctively to the phone, now silent, yet glowing in her memory, reminding her, if you don't keep your word, everything collapses. She lifted her head and met Victor's gaze. I am not making this up. I heard the client clearly. If you don't want to believe me, wait until morning, when Mr. Sterling returns. I'll tell him directly. Victor's eyes bulged. His voice tightened into a snarl. You dare go over my head? Naomi answered softly but firmly. I am not going over anyone. I am only speaking the truth. The room grew suffocating with tension. Victor glared at her as though he could tear apart her fragile courage with his stare. But instead he inhaled sharply, lips curling into a half-smile. Fine, let's see. Tomorrow morning, when Sterling learns that a cleaning girl played director, you'll be tossed out on your back. And then I'll enjoy watching who still remembers your name, Carter." With that, Victor turned, stormed out, and slammed the door behind him. Naomi stood alone, legs trembling, as if she had just survived a battle without weapons. She knew danger awaited her, but deep inside a small flame burned. For the first time, she had neither avoided nor stayed silent. For the first time, Naomi realized discrimination could silence a person, but it could never extinguish the truth. She bent down, picked up the scrap of paper she had scribbled on during her call with Moreau. The shaky but clear notes about the exclusivity clause, about the warning that the deal collapses before dawn. She slipped it into her pocket, pressed her hand against it, as though it were the only shield she had against the coming storm. Outside the glass walls, the city still blazed with light. But within Naomi, tonight was darker than ever, and brighter than it had ever been. After Victor left, the office fell back into silence. But it was no longer the quiet of a building asleep. It was a heavy silence, dense like layers of dust pressing down on Naomi's chest. She stood there, hand still on her pocket, where the trembling note lay. That flimsy scrap of paper, but to Naomi it was her only proof that she wasn't imagining things, that she hadn't invented a story to overstep as Victor accused. Naomi drew in a long breath. The chill from the air conditioner filled her lungs, making her shiver. She knew, come morning, it would be like a trial. And there she would be, a black woman, a temporary worker, standing before powerful men in sharp suits, voices strong enough to shake the markets. At that thought, memories rose layer upon layer. She remembered being 24, applying for a job at a bank. After the interview, the manager set her file down, looked her straight in the eye. "Naomi, I think you're smart, but to succeed here, you'll need a different image, a more professional look." He didn't need to spell it out, but his glance at her natural curls and dark skin said enough. Naomi pressed her lips together. She only bowed her head and walked away. No resistance. She remembered her days as a data entry assistant. Every time she stepped into a meeting room, she was the one making coffee, setting up chairs, and then disappearing into the corner. When she once tried pointing out a mistake in the figures, the team leader chuckled. "Thanks, but let the professionals handle it. You stick to the paperwork." Naomi fell silent again. She learned to lock her own voice deep inside, like a box sealed tight. She remembered the time she went with her white friends to a company party. The security guard stopped her at the door, scrutinized her invitation, while letting her friends walk through with ease. A guest whispered, loud enough for her to hear. Surprising, they even invited someone like her. Naomi kept smiling, pretending not to hear. Because if she reacted, she would be labeled too sensitive, unprofessional. Those memories rushed back, tightening her throat. For years, she had chosen silence as survival. Silence to keep a job. Silence to avoid trouble. Silence to avoid being branded a troublemaker. But tonight, in the chairman's office, under the cold fluorescent glow, Naomi realized silence came in different forms. One kind of silence was surrender, but the other kind was resistance. Naomi had not shouted at Victor. She had not knelt to beg for forgiveness. She had held still, eyes steady, voice even, leaving behind 3 words, "I speak truth." It was that silence that sent Victor storming away in frustration. Because sometimes it isn't an argument that cuts deepest, it's calm. Naomi stepped out of the office. Her cart still waited in the long, empty corridor. The wheels squeaked faintly, blending with the hiss of wind against the glass. With each step, she felt as though she carried a mountain on her back. Inside her, fear remained intact. She knew well that come morning, this might be her last day in the building. Victor would not let it pass. He would twist every accusation, paint her as undisciplined, fabricating stories for attention. But Naomi had no way back. She had made a promise to Moreau. She had spoken the name Carter into the phone so that a man in Paris placed his trust in her. She could not betray that promise. Naomi stopped at the end of the hallway where the glass doors opened to the night cityscape. The stream of cars kept flowing, light spilling like blood through steel arteries. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race. And strangely, within that fear flickered a small flame: pride. For the first time in years, Naomi was not just the cleaning girl. She was a witness, the only one who had heard the truth. And she would guard it, even with the silence of steel if she must. She returned to the small break room for contract staff and sat down on the rickety wooden chair. Her calloused hands rested on the scrap of paper. On it, in hurried strokes, she had written, "Client in Paris rejects exclusivity clause, threatens to cancel the deal by dawn. Carter." She knew the paper might have no legal weight, but it was proof of dignity. Proof that she had dared to speak her way. Naomi closed her eyes, letting her body drift into a restless sleep, wrapped in tension. That night, her dreams were no longer of scrubbing floors, no longer of contemptuous stares. She saw herself in a bright room, someone truly listening to her. Outside, dawn was preparing to break. And with it, Naomi knew the trial of truth was about to begin. The first light of morning streamed through the massive windows of Summit Financial's tower. The sun was still low, but its rays glinted across the polished wooden floor, turning the entire 45th floor into a cold sea of gold. Naomi had been awake long before dawn. She couldn't sleep. The note still sat in her pocket, and each time her fingers brushed against it, her heart beat harder. 7 o'clock sharp. The elevator chimed. The steel doors slid open. Richard Sterling stepped out. He wore a pale grey suit, a deep blue tie, the composed face of a man long accustomed to power. Behind him trailed his personal assistant, clutching a thick file. Naomi stood in the hallway, only a few steps from the office. When she saw him, her throat tightened. Every muscle begged her to turn and run. But her feet held steady. Because in her head, Moreau's voice from Paris echoed, "I will remember the name Carter." Sterling entered his office. Seconds later, Victor's voice rang out, urgent, triumphant. "Mr. Sterling, I must report immediately. Last night, a contract worker, Naomi Carter, trespassed in your office, answered client calls, and even fabricated claims about contractual terms. I strongly recommend her dismissal at once." Naomi felt her face burn. Victor's words were loud enough for the whole hallway to hear. A few arriving employees turned, their eyes flickering with curiosity and pity. Sterling turned back, his cold gaze settling on Naomi. "Carter," he said, his deep voice calm but heavy enough to drag the air down, "do you have anything to explain?" Naomi gripped the hem of her shirt, her hands trembling. 1,000 scenarios flashed through her mind. One wrong word, and she would be thrown out immediately. She swallowed, then stepped into the office. The vast room seemed to swallow her small frame whole. "Mr. Sterling," Naomi began, her voice shaking but clear. "Your office phone rang all night. On the line was Mr. Jean-Luc Moreau, from Paris. He said the exclusivity clause in the contract did not match the original. He threatened to cancel the deal before dawn." Victor cut in, his voice sharp as a blade. Outright lies. A cleaning woman with no legal knowledge daring to speak about a billion-dollar contract. Absurd. Naomi didn't look at him. She pulled the note from her pocket, her hand still trembling, and placed it on the chairman's desk. "This is what I wrote down during the call," she said softly. "The time, the content, nothing added, nothing omitted." Sterling picked up the note, his eyes scanning the lines. He remained silent, but his assistant suddenly frowned, flipping open the file in his arms. "Mr. Sterling," the assistant spoke up, "the contract I reviewed last week, it had no exclusivity clause, but the version currently stored in the system does. Someone inserted it." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Victor stepped back slightly but tried to steady his tone. She may have misheard, or perhaps she made this up to draw attention. Naomi lifted her head, her eyes glowing strangely bright. She didn't shout. She didn't lash back. She only looked directly at Sterling, her voice slow and steady. "You don't have to believe me, but Mr. Moreau will call again, and when he does, you will hear it from him." Sterling held her gaze in silence for a long moment. Then he folded the note, set it down in front of him, and turned his cold eyes on Victor. "Very well, we will wait." Sweat glistened on Victor's forehead, though he forced a stiff smile. "Of course, Mr. Sterling. I only wanted to protect the company." Naomi stepped back, her heart pounding hard in her chest. She knew the real battle still lay ahead, but at least this time, she had not been swallowed whole by silence. Beyond the glass, the sun had risen higher, pouring directly into the chairman's office. And Naomi felt that the light was no longer out of reach. The air in the chairman's office was taut as a drawn string. Sterling stood behind the gleaming wooden desk. Naomi's handwritten note lay neatly before him. Beside him, the assistant flipped through pages of the contract file, eyes racing across the lines with growing tension. Victor stood with arms crossed, forcing a mask of calm, though beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. And Naomi, she kept her distance, clutching the hem of her shirt, her heart thundering in her chest. Then, the phone rang. The sound cracked through the room like a starting gun. Sterling reached out, lifted the receiver and spoke in his even, low voice. "This is Richard Sterling." The voice on the other end burst forth instantly, angry, urgent, relentless. "Finally, Mr. Sterling, do you know what kind of night I've had? I, Jean-Luc Moreau, have been called countless times, and only one person answered. A woman named Carter. She was the only one who listened. Without her, I would have cancelled everything before dawn." The room went still. Sterling's eyes slowly shifted toward Naomi. She felt her feet rooted to the floor. Every word from Moreau reached her, carrying the unmistakable truth. She was the reason the deal still lived. Sterling pressed the speaker button, placing the call on the loudspeaker. "Mr. Moreau," he said calmly, "I apologize for the delay. I've been informed of an issue regarding the exclusivity clause. I need to confirm, in the original contract, that clause did not exist." "Of course not," Moreau roared. "It's a blatant trick. If it remains, we walk away immediately. We are not children to be trapped, and I demand to know who authorized its insertion." Victor cleared his throat, trying to intervene. "Mr. Moreau, there may be some misunderstanding. A temporary worker without proper knowledge might have—" "Silence," Moreau cut in, his voice like steel. "The only person I trusted last night was Carter. Everyone else gave me nothing but silence. $1 billion company, and you let a client call all night with no response. It's an insult." Victor froze. His face flushed crimson, but he had no words left. Sterling turned to his assistant. "Check the contract edit logs." The assistant's fingers flew across the keyboard, then he looked up, pale. "Mr. Sterling, the exclusivity clause was added at 10 p.m. last night. The account used to make the change belongs to the Vice President of Human Resources, Victor Lang." The air in the room solidified. Naomi could hear the blood pounding in her ears. Sterling snapped his gaze back, eyes sharp as blades. "Victor, explain." Victor stammered, voice hoarse. I only, it was a temporary suggestion. I thought it might benefit the company. I intended to report it to you this morning. I never expected that the very employee you despised would save the company you nearly ruined. Sterling spat, each word like a hammer. Naomi said nothing. She only stood steady, her gaze fixed, while inside her rose a strange sensation. For the first time, her silence carried more weight than shouting ever could. Sterling lifted the receiver, spoke firmly into the speaker. "Mr. Moreau, I confirm the exclusivity clause will be removed immediately. The contract will revert to the original, you may rest assured." There was a pause, followed by a heavy exhale on the other end. "Good. I'll allow it to continue. But remember this, Sterling. Next time, I expect respect, and I expect to hear Carter's voice again, not because she is a director, but because she knows how to listen like a human being." Click. The call ended. The room fell into silence. Every gaze turned toward Naomi. Victor kept his head bowed, lips trembling, knowing all his schemes had collapsed. And Sterling, for the first time in his career, allowed a flicker of doubt to touch his iron face. He stared at Naomi for a long moment, as though seeing a truth he had never imagined. In the midst of a vast machine of power, the one who saved Summit was a woman invisible in their eyes. Naomi drew a deep breath. She neither flaunted pride nor lowered her head. She stood there, a silent witness, yet her silence was strong enough to shake an entire system. Beyond the glass, the morning light spread across the city. But for Naomi, that light was no longer just the dawn of New York. It was the dawn of truth itself. The vast expanse of the chairman's office seemed frozen after the call ended. The dry click of Moreau hanging up echoed in the silence, like a judge's gavel closing a trial. Naomi stood there, hands clasped tightly, her heartbeat pounding so loudly she could hear every beat. Victor kept his head bowed, his crimson tie catching the morning light, looking out of place, like a streak of blood against grey stone. Sterling slowly turned, his eyes locked on Victor. "Do you have anything further to say?" Victor swallowed hard, forcing out a strained smile. "Mr. Sterling, I believed the clause would safeguard the company's long-term interests. I intended to report and revise it this morning. That the client discovered it was truly unforeseen." Sterling's voice rasped low harsh between his teeth. "Safeguard? You tried to deceive a strategic partner in a billion-dollar contract and call that protection?" Victor stumbled back a step, sweat beading down his temples. "Mr. Sterling, Sterling raised his hand, cutting him off. "Enough. Victor Lang, you have betrayed the company's trust and nearly cost us one of our most important clients. I cannot allow you to remain in leadership." He turned to his assistant. "Immediately revoke his system access. Call security to escort him out. From this moment, Mr. Lang no longer belongs to Summit Financial." The words cracked through the room like thunder. Victor's face drained of color. He stammered, You can't. I've served here for more than 10 years. Sterling's reply came like steel. "You may have worked 10 years, but the very person you scorned is the one who kept this company standing this morning. Leave." 2 security guards stepped in. Victor struggled, his eyes darting one last time toward Naomi, blazing with a mixture of contempt and helpless fury. It was a look half scorn, half defeat. But this time, Naomi did not bow her head or shrink away. She returned his gaze with calm, steady eyes that did not waver. The door slammed shut. Victor was gone, along with the power that had once made so many tremble. Silence lingered for several more seconds. Sterling stood with his back turned, staring out the window where the morning sun glared off the tower opposite. He exhaled as if casting off a great weight. Then he turned, his eyes settling on Naomi. For the first time, there was no cold distance in his gaze, not the look of a CEO toward a contract worker. It was recognition. "Carter," Sterling said slowly, "do you know what you've done this morning?" Naomi pressed her lips together, her fingers brushing unconsciously against the hem of her shirt. "I only answered the phone and told the truth." Sterling shook his head. "No, you saved the company. Moreau is not the sort of partner who forgives easily. Without you, everything would have ended before dawn." Naomi lowered her eyes. A strange, overwhelming emotion rose in her chest. For years, she had grown used to being called "Hey Girl," the cleaning girl, and now her name, Carter, had been spoken by the chairman, not in mockery but in respect. Sterling continued. "Ironic. In a tower full of people with titles, the one we never noticed became the most important person of the night." Naomi lifted her head slightly. Her eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. "Mr. Sterling, I don't want to be important. I only want to be seen as a human being who can be seen and heard." The room fell into silence. The assistant paused, his expression unsettled. Sterling stood still, thoughtful. At last, he nodded slowly. "You're right, and I forgot that for 7 years. I never asked your name. Never once did I look into these eyes to realize that behind the uniform stood a human being, carrying dignity." A shiver ran through Naomi. That confession, so simple, yet to her it washed away years of dust that had weighed upon her spirit. Sterling stepped forward, his voice deeper, warmer. "Today, Carter, you are not just a contract worker. You are the one who kept Summit Financial standing, and I want everyone in this building to know it." Naomi had no chance to reply. Her chest tightened, not with the fear of old, but with emotion rising, fierce and full. Only hours later, the news spread through every floor. They whispered that Victor Lang had been fired for fraud. And alongside that, one name rippled through hallway conversations: Naomi Carter. The woman once invisible had become the center of every glance, not glances of scorn, but of surprise and respect. As Naomi walked the corridors, heads turned and some even nodded in quiet greeting. For the first time in years, she felt she truly existed within the tower. That day, something in the Summit Financial Tower felt different. News of Victor Lang's dismissal spread faster than the printers during peak hours. Employees whispered that he had inserted an illegal clause, nearly costing the company a billion-dollar deal. But what stirred even greater talk was the name of a woman few had ever noticed before: Naomi Carter. Her name echoed in hallways, in elevators, at the coffee counter. "Isn't she the night janitor?" "No, I heard she's a contract support worker." "Whatever she is, she saved the company." Moreau himself mentioned her by name. As Naomi walked past those eyes, a rush of emotion swelled within her, strange, overwhelming, bittersweet. For 7 long years, she had grown used to being invisible. And now suddenly, attention pressed in on her from every side, making her steps feel like they touched an entirely new ground. That afternoon, Sterling called Naomi to his office. The same room where she had trembled while answering a phone the night before now glowed with late sunlight. Sterling sat behind his desk, his demeanor no longer distant. He motioned for her to sit in the chair she had once dared only to stand beside. "Carter," he began, "I owe you my thanks. You didn't just save a contract, you saved Summit's honor." Naomi fell silent, her hands laced tightly together. "Sir, I only did what needed to be done. I didn't want the company to lose its chance." Sterling nodded, his gaze stern but warmer than before. "And it is precisely because you think that way that you are different. Many here carry lofty titles, collect enormous salaries, but last night when the phone rang, none of them were there, only you, and you stood up." He paused, exhaled. "I want to reward you. A permanent position, a higher salary, even a company-sponsored apartment. You deserve it." Naomi shivered. Those were the things she had once dreamed of: stable work, a home less cramped. But in that moment, the truth was clear. If she accepted only those things, the story would soon be forgotten. People would remember Naomi as an exception while continuing to dismiss the hundreds of others left unseen, like her. She drew a deep breath, lifted her head, and met Sterling's gaze. "Sir, I do not refuse your reward, but what I want is something else. Not for me, for everyone like me." Sterling frowned, leaning slightly forward. "What do you mean?" Naomi placed both hands on the desk, her voice slow, steady, firm. "I want Summit to have a clear anti-discrimination policy. I want contract workers, the ones overlooked, to have a place where they can speak when they are insulted or ignored. An independent hotline. An equity committee where the smallest voices will be heard." The room froze into silence. Sterling studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly but firmly, he nodded. "Carter, you've just saved the company a second time." He turned to his assistant. "From today, establish the equity committee. Carter will serve as an honorary advisor. All HR policies must pass through this committee before approval." Naomi's chest tightened. Not from personal pride, but because she knew, from now on, others would no longer be forced into silence the way she once was. In the weeks that followed, Summit Financial buzzed with change. An anonymous mailbox has been created for employees to report instances of bias. A series of unconscious bias trainings was launched, and for the first time, contract workers were invited to meetings where their voices could be heard. Naomi did not seek the spotlight. She still worked the night shift, still carried the quiet rhythm of habit. But every time she entered the building now, someone called her name and greeted her with genuine eyes, and for Naomi that meant more than any bonus ever could. One evening, standing at the glass on the 45th floor, gazing down at the city blazing with light, Naomi whispered, "That night the phone called my name, but truly it calls the name of everyone who has ever been overlooked." She knew the battle against discrimination would not end in a single night. But at least, from that night, one door had opened. A journalist once asked Sterling at a press conference, "What lesson did you take from this incident?" Sterling stayed silent for a while, then replied, "That sometimes those we think are invisible see most clearly, and titles do not define worth, actions do." His words spread across headlines. But for Naomi, what mattered most was a simple moment. An old security guard smiling for the first time as he said, "Good evening, Miss Carter." Naomi nodded softly, her heart warming. The story did not end with fireworks, nor with lavish rewards. It ended with recognition, the very thing Naomi and countless others had longed for all their lives. Because some victories are not measured in contract numbers, but in the shift of a gaze, when people truly see each other for the first time. And if one message had to be carried forward, it would be this: there will come a time when the one thought lowest saves what is highest. And when that time comes, truth will force every eye to look straight.